Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server-related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features, or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos L. Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Compañeros, welcome to episode 96. And today, Steve and I are going to be doing something a little bit different, and we're going to be talking a little bit. Concept is something a little bit different, and we're going to be talking a little bit about building community tools and referencing a couple of really successful examples as we kind of go through and talk about this a little bit.
Yes, and those tools are some things that people probably use, some of them every day in their work. So it shows how valuable they can be.
Yes. Before we get it, and so we're going to be talking about, I guess the concept is as you put something out there and you want to share it with others, how have some of these successful, and quote unquote successful, meaning lots of people have participated in providing feedback or giving of their time into testing and things like that. And if you wanted to replicate some of that, kind of what goes in, what's involved with it, and why perhaps some of these tools are successful and why others might not be. And we're not going to talk necessarily about all the ones that aren't super successful. We're not trying to embarrass anybody here, but we're going to.
Yep. And I think there's a big difference there between a community tool that somebody creates and nobody ever uses, and a community tool that somebody creates and people use every day and people even contribute to every day.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right. And I guess we're going to focus on the contribution components. So for example, OLA's scripts, the minion stuff, SP who is active, won't necessarily, quote unquote, qualify for this, only because generally they may be receiving feedback, but they're not necessarily openly soliciting it, something that they've just developed and kind of made available. We're looking at or focusing on tools that have a, hey, you want to help out, submit your idea here kind of idea.
Yep. And it's not to say that any of those tools are bad by any means, because they're all pretty awesome. It's really just looking at how people contribute. And
that's
how
right.
you
The
go
collaboration components.
Yeah. From a single person as the contributor or a single
and we chat.
It's really just looking at how people contribute. And
that's
how
right.
you
The
go
collaboration components.
Yeah. From a single person as the contributor or a single company to the community actually being involved.
Right. So before we jump into that, I do want to take a minute and give a shout out to Ernest, who lives in the DC area. We met up at SQL Saturday Baltimore this last weekend, came up and we chatted a bit. He mentioned that he listened to the podcast, and so wanted to give a shout out to him. It can be a little bit daunting, right, to reach out and say what you like or what you don't like. And so I appreciate him coming up, saying hello, and we were able to chat just a bit and kind of get his take on what he thought about the show, what was good, and maybe what we could do differently.
Yep. And another shout out came from Andre Ranieri. And his comment was, yes, number 93, that's episode 93, left me in a cold sweat thinking about some of the mistakes I've made and servers taken down. I asked myself what mistakes I've made in the 50.
Yeah, we're with you there, yeah. Andre. And I guess ultimately we want to, hopefully we're making some of those mistakes rather in the test environment. So
Or for a previous employer, not for your current employer.
That's right. And I think, which I think we're going to get into in the conversation here, a great way to engage the community is to talk about, ways that others can avoid the same mistake that you've made.
Yep. We had another shout out. This was in regard to Database Health Monitor, and this came in from Derek Bovenkamp. And his comment was, one word, awesome. And what that was referring to is that a new feature that I added in last week's release of Database Health Monitor, where in the future, when there's an update available, it'll tell you there's an update. You just click yes, and it'll download the file, install it, and then restart Database Health Monitor. So you don't have to go out and get dollar every single. And then he said, now if only Microsoft would copy this. The new versions of SSMS are seriously frustrating, especially because it feels like every month it's updated.
Right.
And I think what he's getting at there, and this originally came from a conversation I had with him where he was complaining about how SSMS makes you download the file and run the installer every single month, where if they could just, and that's where I thought, oh, well, let's make Database Health Monitor do it quicker and easier. So thanks for the input there, Derek. I appreciate it.
Yes, very nice little feature. So a quick note on the Compañero conference. We're excited to announce that all of our speakers are set. We've been able to identify them, or at least what we think we have, and some of that might be subject to change as if schedules get updated. But we have basically all that we can handle, and we appreciate everybody reaching out to us. It's not to say that we couldn't, squeeze in a surprise speaker, but for all intents and purposes, reaching out to us. It's not to say that we couldn't, squeeze in a surprise speaker, but for all intents and purposes, our speaker setup is straight, and we're going to be announcing those on the website at compañeroconference.com here in the next couple of days. Of course, we'll be talking about them on the podcast, each one here as we get close.
So look for those announcements. We do have a total of 6 speakers beyond Carlos and myself. So Carlos and I and 6 makes 8. So it's going to be quite a few people presenting. We're going to have a motley
crew there. One date to keep in mind is that we are going to have a price increase on June 16th, which just so happens to be my birthday. And so if you'd like to get in at the lowest possible level of $400, you can do that before June 16th. And we'd love to see you there.
Yep. And that's the early bird pricing until that point, I guess.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Is that right, Carlos?
Yes, we're going to sprinkle in something a little extra. If you're there on Tuesday evening before the opening social, we're going to invite everyone in the early bird option, those who can register beforehand. We're going to invite them out to a dinner with as many speakers as it can make it as well. And we'll have a dinner at a restaurant that will be announced in a couple of weeks ahead of time, and get together and be able to kick that off with everybody there. So,
yep, I think that'll be a fun time to get to meet those early registrants.
That's right.
And talk with all the speakers as well.
Yep. Okay. Now for a little SQL Server in the news. It's amazing. It's impressive how much functionality continues to roll out of Microsoft. And one that I know that people were asking about for quite a while, and admittedly, I need to play a little bit more with, but that is the Azure Analysis Services in Azure, obviously.
Oh,
as a name implies.
Very interesting. Because if that's what it sounds like, previously you needed to use analytic services local and then push your data to Azure. It sounds like now you'll be able to run analysis services in a serverless environment in Azure?
Yeah, so you're going to, without having to have some of that infrastructure, be able to take advantage of the cubes and some of these other things, so the aggregates, and do so in a way that you don't have to worry as much about the servers. And so kind of an interesting idea. And I think, and so at first I thought, okay, well, who would be a good candidate for some of this? And I think it's really those who have adopted Power BI, and I don't want to say outgrown, but maybe have more data. They're throwing a little bit more data at Power BI than it can handle, and they need some. They want to do some cleansing, right? Or so smooth some of the edges of that data before they actually present it to the end users. And I think that's going to be probably a predominant use case for most of those who are going to be the early adopters of this service.
Yep. Another good use case, I think, would be people who have pushed a lot of data into the Azure Parallel Data Warehouse.
That's right.
And they then need to build cubes or other analysis components off of that.
Right. That's true. So it will be interesting. And again, I just had a discussion today with somebody who would like to adopt this. And so we'll probably be dipping our feet a little bit more into it. And so it'll be interesting to see how that service responds and behaves, compared to what we've kind of known and been used to.
All right. Well, the URL for this episode is sqldatapartners.com/community tools with an S on the end of it. or SQL Data Partner.
Something that you have.
SQLDataPartners.com/96 for our episode number.
That's right. And so ultimately, again, our topic today is our thoughts on what it takes to get good participation for the community. And we should say first, if you have done anything in the community, right, there are no losers. You've done it. You've stepped out and you stuck your neck out and you've made something that you have created available to others. And so whether that's your mother who's downloaded it or, 1,000 people, you're still pretty cool in our books. And, congratulations are in order for at least taking the step to make that happen.
Yep. And I think one of them that we've come across that I think is a real key thing to look at when you're doing this is really, why are you doing it?
That's right.
Why are you building a community tool?
Exactly. And so two of the tools that we're going to highlight are the Brent Ozar Unlimited Blitz scripts, and then the tools from dbatools.io. And so these two have had great success, if you will, not only in name recognition, which I think obviously helps, but that in fostering people to give their time and suggest an improvement or a way to enhance what it is that they're trying to do.
Yep. And I think between those two projects, they've kind of had a different path to where they got to what they are today. And I think that with the DBA tools, they started out and for years they have been open source with many contributors.
Right.
And then with the Blitz scripts from Brent Ozar, that was something that was originally built internally by Brent Ozar and team and eventually was let into the wild as the open source concept.
I started adding
them that we'll go ahead and share now.
All right. So DBA tools actually didn't start out how it is now. Initially, way back in 2014, I created a bunch of migration commands and I made a little project on GitHub called SQL Migration. And then I started adding a couple things like get SQL server key, where it dug into the registry and it grabbed that information. And then I just kept adding more. And over time, I realized that it could be more than just a migration tool. So I called it DBA tools. And then I just started marketing it that way as a general PowerShell tool for DBAs. And it really took off from there.
Yeah, I think for me, it was like with our stuff, it was always we built it ourselves to use it ourselves first. And I think it was what made it so successful is it has to be something that you're going to code.
We went back to episode
that you can evangelize it and use it every day yourself. If it's something that you think I'm going to do this for the community, and you're coding it for someone else, you got to be user number one. Chrissy was clearly user number one of her stuff, and then you look at everybody who started piling onto that because it was just so obvious that it made production DBAs' lives better.
And Steve, even as we went back to episode 86, we were talking with Sebastian about his T-SQL T, he talked about they were working in a hospital, they had this large project and needed to, basically had this elephant, if you will, that they needed to chew up and swallow. And he needed a way to break it into smaller chunks. And that's how the framework was built. And then it kind of improved upon ever since. And I think, again, so that first question of why are you building something? I think a key to success, and we can talk about how we want to define success, but to getting engagement is building something that you are going to use. We can talk about how we want to define success, but to getting engagement is building something that you are going to use, right? Something that's going to solve some problem that you have.
Absolutely. And I think that with the example that Sebastian had on T-SQL T, it was something that even if he'd never put it out in the wild, I think he would have built most of it
to
do the job that he was trying to do at that hospital.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it can go sideways. And I think sometimes, particularly, as entrepreneurs or things that we're trying to do, we think, oh, hey, people might be interested in this. And Brent actually mentions this idea of trying to build something for somebody else. And he says it just lands with a thud, right? His quote is, if users don't have a reason to actively use it, and if you don't have a reason to actively use it, it's just not going to catch on.
Right. And I think that's so important. And I think that there's things I look at and say, oh.
some of his
source, but then I realized, well, it's something that I wouldn't actively be using. I'd
Right.
just be kind of doing it here and there. And it's maybe not worth doing at that point.
Sure. Yeah, because it is interesting as to what even people latch on to. I know when I was talking with Adam Mechanic in episode 22 about SP Who is Active, it had been available for about 8 years there. Some of his favorite components of SP Who is Active was not something that I was that I was using. And admittedly, that may just be because I'm a knuckle dragging Neanderthal, and he's a lot smarter than I am.
Oh, and I think with that, I mean, another example is like the OLA maintenance scripts there, right? Where prior to discovering those, I'd built some of my own.
Sure.
And then I realized that I saw his and I thought, oh, I could either put mine out as publicly available, or I could just
and the history there, because he does a couple of different things, but I think backups, or maybe index maintenance is maybe what it's most popular for, and we were all kind of struggling with that, and so it was like, hey, that's a problem that a lot of people have. Yeah, let me put it out there and make it better. And I think as more people have used it, again, they are able to provide some feedback, or he talks with them, and it makes it better for him in his environments, and then for everybody else as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Right? They are able to provide some feedback, or he talks with them, and it makes it better for him in his environments, and then for everybody else as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Now, this kind of brings up the question as what success looks like with a community project. And I think we can use the default database answer of it depends, right? On what it is that you think success is. Obviously, engagement is a component, but it's not necessarily the only metric that we want to be using.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that is being able to get those active contributors.
Right.
I mean, and that's not an easy thing to do.
No, that's right.
And I think that, anyone can throw something out there and maybe it'll get a little bit of acceptance, but getting people to contribute, I think that makes a huge difference between an active and successful
Chrissy,
one that's just maybe will languish along the way.
Sure.
And I know we all get busy with different projects and things. And if you're the only person contributing, well, that product may slow down during the times when you're busy. But if there's other people contributing at the times you get busy, then it will continue to move along.
Yep. And Chrissy, LeMarie from dbatools.io, she actually brings up another point as to one of the reasons why she puts together her tool.
I don't know if you could hear my smile, but it's true. I've seen people come and say like, man, CK was walking me through this thing. And I'm just like, dude, CK, you're awesome. It's been an incredible journey with CK, with Claudio, with Rob and Aaron and everybody. Yeah, it's actually this is kind of out there, but it's reduced. I don't know about you guys, but for me, kind of being isolated here as both an IT worker and a somewhat of an introvert and living in a foreign country, it's reduced the isolation. And I love hanging out. I hang out with CK all the time. I hang out with Rob all the time. I hang out with Aaron, and we all just kind of hang out together, and we all are passionate about this project.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who note that DBAs are a lonely bunch. There's not a lot of people who understand what we're doing in the business, even if we work with them every day. And having a group of other DBAs who you can, complain to or laugh about the same problems or look at an execution plan with so many zeros it doesn't fit on the screen, that's meaningful to people like us.
Okay, so we have this idea. We have something that we think is helping us and we think will help other people. So it kind of begs the question as what does it take to keep the community going? and I think we can kind of skip to the end and, a spoiler here for everyone is that it's a lot of work. If you think building the tool was hard, being a community manager is even harder, right? Those of you who have done anything with your user groups, this might be a good parallel to something like that.
Yep. And I think one of the keys that I remember from the DBA Tools podcast that they had talked about was how making everyone feel welcomed. And that's not always easy to do in a online GitHub style environment.
Right.
Because sometimes things don't come across as smooth or as nice as you'd like them to. And I think that having a positive engagement is really key there.
Yeah. And so both Chrissy and Brent give us some thoughts on what it takes to kind of keep their communities going.
So I do have to tend to the channel almost like it's a garden. It is absolutely real sick. I let everybody know, hey, I won't be around. I'm, having problems with my cat, always having to bring him to France, which is fancy. I'm bringing my cat to France to get some fixes, and I let them know. And I do invest a lot of time, ensuring that the conversation continues, ensuring that the pull requests are merged. So there is absolutely a lot of time invested in, in developing those relationships like you were talking about.
When someone contributes code, when they make a pull request, you can kind of bet on it being probably an hour of your life. Like that you're going to go through when they submit a piece of code, even if you've worked with them before. So I have to spin up instances of SQL Server from 2008 to 2016. I got to test it on case-sensitive databases, databases with large numbers of indexes, servers with large, to ask them to do that. We have this, huge lab in AWS and Google, so it's easier for us to do that. But there goes an hour of my life just testing it across those. Even with automated testing, like I've got a few cheap and easy SQL scripts that just roll it out everywhere and bang on it. Then I got to find what the errors are and make sure that it's actually going to work. Then you want to document it enough that the other people can go on and use it. Sometimes that means writing documentation in the form of a blog post, because someone will write a check for something new in SP Blitz, like a new crazy weight type. And then if there's no good documentation out there on it, you have to go write it. So it can be 1, 2, 3, 4 hours to tackle a complex pull request, but even a basic one, it's not unusual to see an hour of your life there. So looking at the GitHub right now, we have 4 pull requests out, Jeff Rosenberg, R.W. Howard, so that I can go request. But even a basic one, it's not unusual to see an hour of your life there. So looking at the GitHub right now, we have 4 pull requests out, Jeff Rosenberg, R.W. Howard, Eric has a couple of them out there, where now just looking at them, I know I'm going to have to go spend, there goes like a half a day on the weekend or like an evening so that I can go tackle these things and make sure that they're good to go publicly. And it's not the contributor's fault when they don't. Often they're really using this code themselves in certain environments, but then they just encounter surprising gotchas, like the case-sensitive database thing that most people don't have to hassle with.
And so we mentioned a little bit about the tech side there, but as you alluded to there previous, Steve, it's not just about technology at that point, right? It's going to be about people.
Absolutely. And I think, part of it is kind of the gamification side of it. And I think that in the GitHub system, there's a lot of that.
To put some of that
and what contributions are. And it's almost like people want to compete to get the most in there.
That's right. They have pretty good metrics there. How many downloads and, pull requests and, all these other type things. And so it helped lends itself to, yes, hey, I'm a project worth contributing to. But again, it does take a little bit of effort to put some of that together. I know. So Chrissy, for example, has her contribution wall, right? So on dbatools.io, if you kind of meet certain metrics, and I think it's like a certain number of lines of code that you have to contribute, then you get added to the Wall of Fame type thing.
Yep. And it's kind of like a high scoreboard on who has had the most contributions.
That's right. But it's another facet of the overall project. And it has, it's not going to make your tool be any better, but it's going to help, engage in your tool be any better, but it's going to help, engage and foster that community.
Well, though, you say it won't make the tool any better. It actually may help make the tool better because those people are going to want to contribute more.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's right. I think I misspoke there, right? In the sense that you're putting in effort that will, I guess, indirectly affect the tool, right? You're hoping that work will then be reproduced by other people who want to participate.
Yep. And I remember, I don't know, many years ago, I tried contributing on a open source Linux project around something I was working on at that point. And I just remember doing that. The people I was contributing with just made me feel stupid. Not necessarily because I didn't know what I was doing, but I just didn't understand their process or their flow. And I think that that's one of the things that the DBA tools do with the wall of contributors. And
then also setting, and so Brent did mention this, so we don't have a quote from it, but kind of that rules of engagement, right? And Chrissy mentioned this as well, as far as like, here's kind of our standards. Here's how we kind of expect certain things to be. Now, she did mention we're kind of working with Constantine and doing those code reviews. And again, that's kind of individual one-on-one time. But again, it helps to let everybody know, like, hey, when you contribute, this is kind of what we're looking for. And this is what we think it should look like. And that will help people kind of self-identify as to whether they can help or not.
Yep.
But it doesn't always go your way. I mean, getting people to contribute might mean that they want to do things that are outside of what you thought your tool was going to do. And Brent's got an interesting quote here on this one.
Well, another thing you said was, you said, how much time do you spend guiding versus building? One of the things that's tricky is you'll sometimes don't line up with where you want to go. Like, even though it's open source, that doesn't mean it has to be 100% community vision. It can still be your vision of where you want the tool to go. Because when somebody contributes code, you're supporting that for the rest of your life. Just because somebody threw in a brand new feature doesn't mean they're going to be around to support it when it breaks. So there's a lot of time where I'd say maybe one pull request out of 4 or 5 where I'll say, you know what, I totally get where you're going with that, but this just isn't going to be something that we do. The classic example is security stuff. People often want to add security stuff into SP Blitz. And I'm just like, I get that it's important to some people, but someone needs to start a security script, because I'm not going to be the guy who's going to explain how security works, because it's simply way out of my wheelhouse.
And I think this one's tough because we've just talked about kind of going to great lengths and creating processes and thinking about how you're going to engage.
It's simply way out of my wheelhouse.
And I think this one's tough because we've just talked about kind of going to great lengths and creating processes and thinking about how you're going to engage people. And then you finally get some folks, engaged, and then you're like, I don't want to do that.
Yep.
And I think that can be tough.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that really comes down to the vision of what it is that your open source thing is going to do.
Right.
And if the vision is we're going to do these things but not include security, well, that's a very different project than if we're going to go build a security platform.
Right.
Not that either one of them is any better or any worse than the other. It's really just focused so that you can do a really good job at what you're doing.
Right. And I think at the end of the day, you have to know that if you accept it, it's going to stick with you or get out.
Yep.
And that could just cause problems, for adoption, things like that. So kind of knowing where you want to go. And I think it's then okay to say, thank you for that, but, we're not going to go down that path, and having that be okay.
Yep.
But they do talk about it being a little bit like having another job.
Yeah, I can see that. I think that there is so much involved in managing all of that, from the code reviews to the people to even getting updates out when that's appropriate, that it could really be like another job.
Right. And so Brent has an interesting quote about this.
Yeah. And it will be draining. This is going to sound awful, but there's a great post. I'll have to go find it on how draining it is. It's like, I'm sorry, you're the new leader of an open source project. But there's going to be a lot of people who file bugs, and you were so proud of your code until the moment all of a sudden people start file bugs, and you were so proud of your code until the moment all of a sudden people start pouring in, hey, this doesn't work. And they're not going to be polite. They're going to be, hey, yo, dog. They're going to be short and to the point. And you have to think of that feedback as a gift, because for every person who tells you it's broken, there are 100 people who downloaded it, tried it, and just went, this sucks. And they're not ever going to take their time to go tell you it was broken. So as bad as it sounds, even the short, snippy, hey, this is broken when I do this, is still good feedback that you should be thankful that people are actually using it. I tell myself that all the time. It's just really hard to keep that frame of mind.
And it's funny, I tried to get Chrissy to kind of nail down and be like, okay, because I started to kind of sense what she was doing, of course, in the Slack channel. She's quite busy. And then even in our interview, kind of doing these individual code reviews. And I thought, oh my goodness, that sounds like a lot of part of what I have to do. And so I actually signed up for the DBA Tools Watcher on GitHub. And so I get notifications. So I signed up on April 7th. And between April 7th and as of the time of this recording, there were 1,017 emails, right, or discussion points, pulls, updates, changes, modifications to the code. And so that is a lot. So here we're recording on the 11th, so just a little over a month, 1,000, right? You divide that by 30. That's pretty intensive.
Oh yeah, and that's far more than any solo developer would ever be able to do.
Exactly.
And it's probably even more than a lot of small companies may be able to do with the development team.
Sure. So I definitely think, again, you are kind of making that commitment to, sure. So I definitely think, again, you are kind of making that commitment to putting in some processes, and then, almost like the DevOps stuff we keep talking about, like making your life a little bit easier and spending some time on things that are going to just help make those processes a little bit easier.
Yep.
Now, one of the things you're going to want to help you with this is good metrics, right? And at least in our case with the podcast, we lament quite a bit about, we can see the download numbers, but then the people that actually engage with us is a teeny tiny fraction of that number.
Yep.
And so kind of knowing how, if you're going in the right direction and kind of getting that feedback is important. And I think, again, Chrissy is a great example of this, is because she is in there talking, promoting, cheerleading, right? Engaging. Hey, you mentioned you were going to do this for me.
A lot of feedback.
Kinds of things.
Yep.
And I think because of that, she's getting good metrics, and she can see a lot of this traffic and where people are going and paying attention to.
Yep. And I think, as you mentioned, the podcast with the thousands of listeners, that's one metric, but how valuable is that really? If you had,
Sure.
you just say I have thousands of downloads of something, is that a good number? If you don't get a lot of feedback, do you assume that everything's perfect, or do you assume that nobody cares enough?
Right.
It's really hard to tell there.
Right. Yeah, and I think, again, so things like GitHub can help with that. But again, there's just another component that you have to then pay attention to.
Yep.
Now, we've been talking a little bit about tools, and at least the ones that we've mentioned have all been tool-based, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to just be a tool in order for you to engage with the community. And Steve actually has a really good example. And so as I was getting dressed today, I actually happened to be wearing my Database Corruption Challenge T-shirt. And I thought that was kind of an interesting way. You weren't necessarily creating a tool so much as you were creating a framework for people to be able to participate in and, contribute. You learned quite a bit, and they also learned as well.
Yep. Now with that, that was something that, it kind of evolved and grew as I did it. I didn't have a real solid plan in the beginning of what it was going to be, but what it turned out to be in the end was a great training platform, a way for people to learn how to deal with database corruption. And with that, I could go and rant and rave all day about here's how you can deal with it. But with contributors, the people who competed in the Database Corruption Challenge, providing their solutions, I was able to learn some really interesting things along the way, and I was able to share those with the community so that others could learn available for people.
So kind of a win-win scenario.
Yep. And although it's technically not an open source thing in the fact that there's no GitHub and people don't contribute in that way, but it is, all of the sample databases and the solutions that are there are freely available for people to download and take a look at and learn from. So it's almost like open learning.
Right, exactly. And I think because you had that mechanism where you were open to the idea of new suggestions, or, hey, have you tried this, or, what about this certain scenario? It lends itself to people wanting to participate and engaging.
Yep.
Another one that's, again, a slightly different take, which some of you may have participated in, I think about the T-SQL Tuesday. Again, that's kind of taken on a life of its own, right? There's now each month there's a leader. The leader then just kind of picks a topic, makes a blog post, lets users know how they can interact with this, and then they make sure that all the posts and whatnot are kind of put together in a single repository, if you will, generally, I guess, on that page, so that those who are interested in learning more about that topic can go and peruse some of the blogs of their choice.
Yep. That's definitely another interesting training with community involvement.
Yes.
Yep. So definitely good stuff.
And again, that's one of those that, maybe a good example of a way to engage without taking on a ton of responsibility. And I know that, originally Adam Mechanic, started that. Steve Jones helped kind of keep it alive, I think, by helping maintain the topics and who was organizing. And then now they have their own website, and different people kind of organize that. So they're able to engage in different ways.
Yep. SQL Saturday is another example. SQL Saturday is another example of community contribution.
That's right. Today SQL Saturday is, it's big, right? It's kind of a big deal, particularly in our community. But I think about, Andy Warren and Steve, and I know there's a couple of others that I'm not mentioning. But kind of putting together those initial SQL Saturdays, where, hey, let's get some pizza and get together and chat, about tech stuff, and how much we now as organizers benefit from the structure that has already been created. I know, if you've ever put one on, you like to fret and worry about all kinds of different things, but there's a whole lot of infrastructure that's already been put together that you're taking advantage of. And branding, of course, as a result of people kind of giving their time and kind of giving feedback to pass about how to make it better, different. Cast
the more successful endeavors in that area.
Sure.
There's a lot of other things people tried along the way out there, but wow, the involvement you get from people all over the world in the SQL community through SQL Saturdays is just amazing.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
Yep.
That's right. And then even to a lesser extent, right? So our podcast, right, kind of a way to engage community. Again, we lamented that we don't have as good of engagement or metrics maybe as some of these other ways, but we like to get out there. It's something that we can do with a little bit of process around it. And people do give us suggestions on things we could talk about, and which we appreciate, and we invite you to keep them coming.
Yeah, and I find it more enjoyable sometimes when we're building a podcast around something that somebody asked for.
Yes.
Rather than just something that we thought up, wouldn't that be nice,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
And pushes us a little bit more, and we usually learn a little bit more in those areas too.
Yep.
But it also leads to some more successful podcasts too. And I think one of the big ones was our indexing podcast that ended up being a double episode.
That's right.
And that was one that people had asked for a long time, and we just kind of never really thought of it ourselves as, hey, let's do an indexing one. The community asked, and we responded, and I think we got some great feedback on that one.
Yeah, that's right. That's a great point.
Yeah.
So kind of wrapping this all together, right, is you may consider, maybe you have something out there that you think you'd like to share. So the question is, should you do it? Right? Now, we don't know that it's for everyone, and I think we've talked about some different ways that you could potentially engage without, doing a full onset tool. But if you have a problem that you've solved and you are committed to it, you like the idea, then I say go for it. You'd like for it, right?
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And it's the kind of thing that if it solved a problem for you and in your environment, there's a good chance that maybe it will solve a problem for someone else.
No, that's exactly right.
And if you want to have that be something that grows and has a life of its own, look for other people to contribute to it. Yep. And you may end up with something way more powerful than you ever thought of.
And this is where we'll open up our podcast. If there's something you'd like for us to talk about, we could probably incorporate that into the SQL Server in the news. Or if you want to just talk about the actual problem that you are solving, we've done that plenty of times. We'd love to have you on, and we could talk about that and how, what the problem is and how you go about solving it. I think that would be an interesting conversation as well. So anything we can do to help contribute to that, let us know, and we'd be happy to make something happen.
Yep. And sometimes that might be that we love what it is and we want to for other people
to make something happen.
Yep. And sometimes that might be that we love what it is and we want to run with it and use it ourselves.
Sure.
As you make it available. Other times it might be coming out and saying, hey, that sounds like a really good thing to go into SP Blitz and go talk to Brent about that.
Right.
Or it might be a great thing for DBA tools, or just understanding what the right avenue is to get that thing you're doing out there and available for other people to use.
Exactly.
Yep.
So we look forward to what the community continues to put forth and some of the neat ideas that are available. And so by all means, again, if you're on the fence, if we can help push you on, to go ahead and do it, go for it. If the things that we've talked about today haven't scared you away.
Yeah, and this isn't for everybody. Some people
that's right.
may look at this and say, no, I'd never want to do that. And that's okay too.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Upcoming episodes, we actually have Chuck Lathrop. Did I say that name right?
Yep, and it's on SQL replication.
That's right. So he's been talking about this quite a bit. And so we thought, hey, let's have him on and talk a bit about that.
Yeah.
Again, the show notes for today's episode are going to be at SQLDataPartners.com/community tools with an S.
Or at /96 for the episode number.
Yes. And so, compañeros, thanks again. If you've made it this far, we appreciate you tuning in. If you've been listening for a while, thank you. If you're new to the program, thanks for tuning in. And we look forward to your feedback. I guess we've been talking quite a bit about, maybe we've been mentioning Twitter, but we actually get more feedback from other places beyond just Twitter. And all of the social media platforms, feel free to reach out to us. And then, of course, at any in-person event, some of the SQL Saturdays. And we'd love to have you out at the SQL Saturdays. And we'd love to have you out at the Compañero Conference if it makes sense for you to be there. So with that, I guess we'll close up this episode. Last thought, Steve?
Well, as far as the social media goes, normally we close out with our Twitter handles, but I think this time I'd like to say, instead of following us on Twitter, come find me on LinkedIn and find Carlos on LinkedIn.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thanks again for tuning in, compañeros, and we'll see you on the SQL Trail.